I would like to start with the first question. It's about translation of search strategies. And the question is, how about the translation of search strategies from Embase to PubMed syntax or the opposite? Maybe you have some experience there or
Yeah,
share it.
I don't have the experience doing that. I think at least one of the papers that I included on that slide, and all the slides will be posted. The recording will be posted. I see a couple of chats questions about that as well. So you can find the papers as well that I've put up. Um, at least one did look at that, and I think it found it worked okay. That which makes sense. You know, that is something that if you can tell it which how to structure different codes, right, for the search. So PubMed uses TIAB, Embase uses something I can't remember exactly what the code is for the same, but for the same aspect, right, for the same little codes and calls for the terms that you have in the search. Um, if you tell it what you needs to replace and how it needs to do so, it will be able to do that. Where it might not be able to work exactly well is in terms of finding the different controlled vocabulary, right? So if it doesn't have access to mesh terms, or even if it does have access to mesh terms, it might not have access to the M-tree terms, right? So depending on those, and this might depend also on the large language models specifically that you're using. I know there's ones out there that have been more developed to help with searching, but sometimes different large language models you have to pay more for or less for. So I can't speak to exactly how effective that is, but in my mind, that is something that it should work well for on some aspects. You will still probably have to go in and, find, if you've got a mesh term for hypertension, find the same relevant mesh term for M-tree. But for all of the free text and the keyword searches and those kinds of things that stay the same between databases, that should be pretty quick, I think, to translate.
Okay. Thanks. And I think this is a quite specific point. It was as I remember, already covered a little bit also in our first talks on systematic reviews and searching. I just copied, sorry, I just copied the this one in the chat for all. Maybe you can have a look on this for further information. Okay, so another question, and it's also quite a good one, is analyzing the potential of LLMs for evidence synthesis. And you mentioned that we need some studies to improve or maybe validate LLMs. The question is, what type of studies would you like to see in regards to LLMs for evidence synthesis? What are the gaps you identified? I think you had the slide where you touched this topic a little bit.
Yeah,
Remember?
yeah. So it is something where, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the synthesis aspect is still let's take 3 or 4 or 5 studies and see what it gives us in terms of summary, right? Or you see sometimes studies where they'll take a question and see what the LLM produces, write me a 1,000 word report on the effect of X on Y, right? That kind of thing. I think those are um, interesting, but I don't think they really get at the effectiveness of LLMs for synthesis because you don't really have a comparator in those. You don't really have when we talk about the effectiveness or um, the final overall synthesis product, right? Right now, our gold standard is still humans. Is still what humans produce, and human experts who are methodologists, who are clinicians, who understand the content and the topic specificity and area of expertise. So, having already completed systematic reviews, I think that is one thing that is a good place to start in terms of, each systematic review, if it's been done fully by humans, fully screened, fully extracted, fully risk of bias assessed, fully synthesized, right, is a full data set of information. And I think uh, we we need more people to take systematic reviews that have been done, and in terms of the searching, going through the whole process, right? In terms of the searching, well, this is the search strategy for this question that was developed by humans. What kind of search strategy do we see the LLMs produce? How does that compare? you know Using quantitative measures, then, if we run the human developed search strategy and the AI developed search strategy, how similar are the results do we get? In terms of, if you then go through the utility of LLMs for even screening those records, right, from the human developed search, if that's our gold standard, how accurate is the sensitivity and the specificity for finding the relevant records, right? And then once you have those, onto the synthesis, what does it look like if you have a human's results section based on, say, 10 included studies, and then if you upload those 10 PDFs to an LLM. And I think the prompting is one of the things that would be very challenging to get right for this, but it could be done in terms of um, training. There are ways that people can also expand and train LLMs. So giving them more systematic reviews, good quality systematic reviews, right? This is showing it what a good synthesis and results looks like, based on studies, specific studies, and then giving it specific studies, and asking it to do the same and apply the same kind of processes and learning that it's done. I think making direct comparisons then between the sections that humans produce and LLMs produce is really how we're going to get at the effectiveness. Without that, you don't really have a comparison for what it's produced. If you just ask it to give you a report on something, you can fact check it, but that's still not a comparison of how well it's done.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Rias. There is another one touching more on the topic of the journals who have to deal with this topic of generative AI, and it is, how have journals been reacting to the potential of Gen AI as a research and writing assistant?
Yeah, so it really depends on the journal and the area, and I would say also the publisher as well, not just the journal, because a lot of decisions are made at the publisher level, and then they trickle down to the specific journals, right? So, um, unfortunately, we can't always blame the editors in chief of the journals for some things, but it's from what I've seen, it seems like most publishers, I'll say, you take my own language there, just want the transparency in the use and clear delineation of, if generative AI has been used for something, you explain how you used it, you explain where it was used, you explain um, what was done to the text. And that's sort of, it's really more of an acknowledgement at the end, right? In the sort of the section where you talk about disclosures, you talk about acknowledgements. I think more and more journals are starting to have a section specific to AI as well, use, right? Even if it's a no, we didn't use AI, that's great. But if you have used AI, being very explicit in that, and I think putting um, in the appendices, right? There's always room in the appendices and supplements for putting your specific prompts and how you use things. So that is useful. And I think that's being done more and more. I think initially there was definitely a big scare. And you were seeing, some people citing ChatGPT as an author, and some people not putting their acknowledgement of ChatGPT, but very clear indications that the text was written by LLMs, um, which is highly problematic. But depending on the journal, it's either more on the extreme, we don't allow any use, or be very explicit in how you are how you have used it. And I think more and more, we're going to see leaning towards that latter. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's fits quite well to also to Cochrane's position. I think there were recently some new policies published. I just copied them in the chat for your interest if you want to have a look on them. And then we can go on with another very good question. Do you think it will be more difficult to assess the quality of published reviews if they are generated by AI, i.e., they will look more similar, and so it will be more difficult to spot the bad ones?
Great question. I don't know that looking more similar is necessarily a bad thing if they're similar in a good way. uh, there's so many bad reviews out there, absolutely. And you can usually tell pretty quickly if they are not great. But the things that I look for and what sort of clues me into it being a bad review is usually not the writing. It's the methods, right, that you can see are there. And granted, if people are using LLMs to write a good method section and not actually following the methods, that's a different problem. That's getting into I forget the word for it, but misbehaving, right? That's getting into people not doing good science. And you have that already anyways, people who are not being truthful about what they've done. You can't really catch that. I think that's hard. But if people are just using LLMs to help them describe what they've done, or right, then you will still know if something has not been done very well. Because for example, the search is, again, I mentioned it's a really common area where I think reviews fail. If they say they search 6, 7, 8 databases and they only retrieved 200 records before removing duplicates, in my mind that's just doesn't seem feasible. No matter what your question is, there's so much literature out there, so that is something that to me triggers me to go in and look and see if I can make a good search quickly that would sort of overwhelm those numbers. Or have they done a risk of bias assessment, right? If they, no matter how well written the paper is, if they haven't done a risk of bias assessment, they can't qualitatively synthesize the evidence. Not risk of bias tool explicitly, but any quality assessment, risk of bias, Newcastle Ottawa scale, whatever. So you have to look for things that indicate a good review. And I don't think having polished language that describes things in necessarily the same way is going to negatively impact that ability. I think we'll still be able to distinguish well done reviews from badly done reviews. It just might help us be able to read them a little bit better.
Yeah. Rias, I have a next one for you. What is the current status of reporting standards like Prisma for Gen AI? I assume you don't know Prisma by heart, but
Yeah, I know they're working on it. They're working on it, and I know there's other. So I was involved with one group that was trying to put out a reporting guideline for generative AI and chatbot use in evidence syntheses. That was with the cheer statement, and that's still being worked on. Or it's finished, but we're waiting for the publication as well, kind of thing. There are groups who are putting out guidance.
uh,
Yeah, it's still coming.
yeah, and I think it's never a mistake to make your methods and your tools very explicit if you use them, and this also includes AI tools, of course. In this regard, I would also like to copy another document here for you. It's about responsible AI use and evidence synthesis. It's from some of the leaders in this field, also associated with Cochrane or Campbell, and just for your interest. All right. I think we have now almost finished our session, but if you would like to give a very short answer, uh, I allow for one more question. What is the probability that if I introduce my text into an LLM model, it will be memorized by the system and used by others? I'm asking that regarding plagiarism and AI detection. Thank you.
I can't give you a probability there. I have no idea how likely it is specifically. I would just assume that it can't happen. And in terms of guidance, so I'm at a conference right now, and just yesterday we had an editorial board meeting with one of the journals, and the guidance is very explicit there in terms of peer review. You cannot use LLMs, generative AI, to help you with your peer review, because it's just, you don't know if you put something in there, if you put a full text of a paper that is not published yet, it's sort of confidential. Um, even if somebody can't directly type in or jailbreak the model to say, give me something that's unpublished or that's not, nobody else can see. Even if that's not the case, the ideas and content that are contained therein might still find their way into responses that other people are asking on similar topics, right? So it's just, I don't think it's fair to all of the researchers out there who put their time in, um, or and yourselves as well as researchers who might want, um, your specific way of your results, your primary data. I would caution and be careful with that. It's I think it's a little bit, as reviewers, where we are working with secondary data, typically, published reports of things. In that case, asking it to synthesize, for help synthesizing 5 studies is probably not going to be potentially damaging, because it already has those likely anyways, right? And to synthesize it is not providing something new necessarily. Um, but if you have something that you've got through data agreements, or you have, and you want to not put out there, I would be sure to keep that to yourself.